Procurement and supply chain management issues are very challenging right now, and finding the right people and skills to meet them is one of the biggest challenges of all. Welcome to Global Sourcing Insights from CIPS. I'm Bob Rosbeck. Our guest today is Don Klock, and we're really glad to have him join us as he is one of those terrific individuals who not only had a great procurement career as CPO for Colgate Palmolive, a global company with a great reputation, but he continues to give back to the profession as an adjunct professor at the Business School of Rutgers University in its executive education program. So welcome to the program, Don. How are you?
Very good. Thank you, Bob.
So our title today claims that procurement, talent, recruitment, and retention are encountering a perfect storm. Now, we all know what that term means as it applies to weather. So, Don, what are the elements that make procurement, talent, recruitment a perfect storm right now?
Okay. Yeah, I think there's three things, Bob. The first one is a major one. It's demographics. And what I mean by that is when you look at the birth rate in the United States, it's below the average. In order to replace people, it has to be about 2.1, and the birth rate is running 1.7. And it's been running 1.7 for 50 years. So since 1971, or whenever I looked at the data the last time, it's been running. So there isn't enough people coming into the workforce. Not enough people talk about this because we have up and downs in our economies and they kind of forget about it. And but the truth of the matter isn't much. Now, I know somebody on the call here might say, well, we'll go to China, or we'll go to Europe or wherever. Well, Europe has problems. They're very low. Some countries in Europe, like Italy, is 1.1 versus 2.1. They don't have enough people. And then even in China, you might recall they had the one-child policy, and they're trying to overturn that and get more people involved, but they don't have enough people. So you might think about if you're strategic sourcing from China, they're also having problems. So this demographic thing isn't going away, and it's a long-term trend, as I said, 50 years. So it's not going to change. So that's the main driving factor. The second factor is us baby boomers. Not everybody on the call is a baby boomer, but for people that are baby boomers, many people are leaving the workforce. Some are just retirement. A lot of baby boomers left during COVID, said, I'm sorry, I've had enough. I'm going to Florida, do whatever. They're leaving the workforce. Now, the sheer numbers are bad. But more importantly, that is where a lot of your senior knowledge is, where a lot of resident knowledge in the thing, and they left. And they left relatively quickly, many of these people, when they said that had enough with COVID, and you didn't necessarily transfer that knowledge to other people in the corporation. So baby boomers have left, and the surveys say they are not coming back, the majority of them. Some people say they might come back, a small percentage, but the majority of people are done. They're retired, and they're going to continue to retire. The third one is labor force participation. So most of you people on the call know that unemployment's about 3.4%, record lows, which contributes to this. But what we really look at, that's an interesting number, we look at labor force participation. These are the people that want to work. And that has been relatively low, about 60%. And what's interesting about that is that the question is, are those people going to come back into the mix, into the fold? Well, a survey that we recently read, I think it was by Michigan State, I'm not sure where, they said that about half of those people are not planning on coming back. And there's another 25% that said, well, I might come back, but I think I'm only going to work part-time. And the other 25% are not coming back. So these three things, the demographics, you can't change. Baby boomers are gone. And we'll have to see what happens. It's going to be interesting after, years after we come out of COVID, will these people come back? But the surveys say not so much. So those are the main things. If you put all that together, that's a perfect storm. And we all got to recognize that and do things differently.
Yeah, I'm really thinking about those senior types because we have situations that, like the whole period of inflation was a whole period where a lot of people in the business procurement had never been in a situation where prices were really rising. They were basically in a buyer's market we were in a buyer's market for close to 20 years, probably, more or less, with very few exceptions. And so when all of a sudden we were in an inflationary period and prices were going up, there were people in procurement who had never encountered that kind of a situation. So it's a real issue to retain that institutional knowledge.
Yeah, those
Yep.
baby boomers lived through the last major one was in the 70s. They've had inflation on and off, but that was a big one where those people like myself lived through those problems. Right.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Yep. We knew them. You know,
yep.
it's all my parents went through the depression. You know, they experienced some of that, and so they knew how to cope, and so they had strategies that were based on that experience. And I think a lot of us who went through the inflationary period of the '70s had the same kind of experiences that younger generation, the millennials and Gen X's, don't have. So where are the skill gaps that you see? We need more skills and capacity, but what skills and capacity are we lacking? Where are the skills gaps?
So let me first just take it about what you should do in this current environment, and then we'll talk about a couple of the skill gaps. So
Okay.
the first thing is that when's the last time you sat back and said, what skills do I need in the future? Right? When's the last time you really did that? Now, we actually did that. We moved from when I was at Colgate and the chief procurement officer, we went from a center-led to a centralized organization, massive change. So we actually went back and said, what skills do we need to run this centralized organization versus a center-led organization? But the point would be is that you need to do that today because things have changed. It's an example. We keep hearing about we need to be more resilient. We need to be more agile. Well, the solution lately is more digitalization. Do you have those skills in your department now or not? Right. So, I think the first thing you need to do is say, let's write down, let's talk to our people. What skills do we need for the future? And then obviously the next thing you take a look at is what do you have? And I think you'd find, let's take digitalization as an example. You're going to find that you don't have a lot of people. My personal experience in a limited number of companies that says that most people in procurement aren't particularly good at technology. Yeah, we all slammed in, SAP and Oracle and things, but now we're slamming in these smaller, working on risk management, and visibility, and tracking, and they're not all necessarily hooked up to SAP and Oracle. So we need to know do our people know how to do that, right? And I think the second one, just another example, would be we were all pretty comfortable before COVID that around risk management. We kind of thought we did a good job. We learned a lot, right? We just a simple example. We didn't really go deep enough about the tiers. We didn't know what were those tiers 2, 3, and 4 doing, and why did those shut down our finished product that we needed out of China or Asia, wherever we were. So what you got to do is you first got to say, what do I need for the future, which is probably going to be different, particularly in light of this, the changes that went on by COVID. And then secondly, what do you have? And one of the things that we kind of laughed at when we did this is that, have you ever gone back and looked at the old job descriptions? Right? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to blow the dust off, right? Because they're really old. The job descriptions, if you could find them, that's a big if, were terrible. So many times what we had to do is rewrite those job descriptions and apply them to people we're looking for in the future. So I'm not sure that answers all your skills, Bob, but the point would be is I think you need a process to evaluate it, and then more importantly, where you are today and what type of people you're looking for. Internally, you got to train them, or you got to go externally and hire them.
Yes. Yeah, you mentioned resiliency, and yeah, what are the skills that you need to make a supply chain resilient? I mean, do we even know what that means?
Yeah.
I don't know. So the first step is actually trying to identify what skills you need, right?
Right.
So that's step one, and then
Look into the future.
look into the future.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easier to look into the past, though. So then how do you close those current or projected skills gaps? What is the next step? Once you say, okay, we're going to need digital skills, we're going to need some, and not just with the big, like you say, the big vendors, but now we have to also try to figure out how to integrate these niche suppliers that are doing specific things like surveys, or they into transparency in the supply chain, or some of them are running reverse auctions and all sorts of niche kinds of projects. So how does an organization deal with all of that to close those current and projected skills gaps?
Well, I'm a biased one because I'm a trainer, but the first thing to do is you got to set up some training programs. I hate to say it, even myself included. The way I am now is that many of the people I worked with have canceled a lot of training during COVID. Now, a lot of it was the regular training that you might expect, 7-step process or something. But I think more importantly, you got to say, what training do we need differently in the future? And if we're going to do, let's say, risk management, how are we going to train our new people, our existing people, and the new people in risk management? And that could be both physical stuff, like what do you do when you go out in the field and look for it, and it could be how you do track and trace and keeping track of stuff. So that's one group of the people you want to think about training. I think the second part, which relates to the previous question, is what you got to make sure you hire the right people externally. So when you're going to do your recruiting, you got to say what skills I look for. So let's come back to the digitalization, not to wear it out, but just as an example. So if you're assuming, at least a lot of my people, when I was at Colgate, weren't real strong in technologies. And so you could train those people, which is certainly possible. Or another approach might say, let's go hire some procurement people that have that background. Now, they still might be strategic sourcing people, but let's find somebody that's done some technology work in a previous company. And if we're going to fill that position, and then they can bring that skill set in and hopefully work with the right people within the company, whether that's IT or wherever it is, to get these technologies. A good example would be is that let's assume you want to do something procurement to pay or something like that. You haven't done it previously, and you want to do procurement to pay because that takes a lot of your time, your buyers. You have buyers in your organization that can work with the business to justify that investment in procurement to pay, where they're going to have to go out and work directly, maybe with the finance department if they control that, or people in the business or IT. Do they really have that expertise or not? I don't know. Sometimes I think companies have it, sometimes they don't. But if they don't, you're going to invest in these technologies and you have to sell them. Companies are not going to say, oh yeah, we'll spend $1 million on that. That seems like a good idea. You're going to have to show them what the benefits are. So I think that probably is what you need to do, and either do it through training, which can be difficult because you may not have the skills to train, or you hire it. Either one.
Yes. Well, CIPS is a training organization, a certification organization, and we also offer very good skills gaps analysis. So so there's my commercial for CIPS. Work that in. How about what do you see as the influence of or how does a manager address the issues that don't necessarily, in recruiting talent, that are not salary issues? I mean, years ago, it would be just a matter of, well, here's the money, and people were looking at the money, and if the money was better someplace else, then they were following the money, as they say. But now there's a lot of other issues involved, particularly the work at home, for instance, is a big one. But also a lot of younger generation workers are also looking at the values of the company. Does the company hold similar values to my values? Is it a sustainable operation? Are we concerned about forced labor? Are we doing fair employment practices, in our shop floor? I mean, I may be in an office in procurement, but there's others on the shop floor, or we're outsourcing to other countries around the world, and we want to make sure that they have fair practices. So, how do you address those kind of situations as a manager trying to manage and recruit new talent?
Yeah, so one of the things they could recognize, particularly from my perspective, is there's the generational differences, right? So the baby boomers we talked about, the millennials are probably our largest workforce, by the way. They're going to be probably the largest workforce. Gen X is first, the baby boomers and Gen X's, but the millennials are going to be your largest workforce in the future. By 2025, it's going to be 75% of your workforce. So, and then you have these new people, these Gen Zs, I think totally different. So a couple things to think about. So what things have changed? Let's just give some examples. Work from home, right? We've now trained people how to work from home, and fairly successfully. Most companies, want to bring people back in, but not all people want to come back in. I just heard a survey recently by a group I consult with that said, the person said that in working from home, now that 75% of the people that have been working from home for the last couple of years want to stay at working from home. So that's something we have to deal with, right? So are we going to allow it, or are we going to have say, look, you got to come back in the office? Are we going to do it, have them come back in the office for a couple of days a week, or full time like we used to in the old days? It's a problem, right? And quite frankly, if the person that says he really wants to work from home, he may be able to go to another company and continue to work from home. So it's a really difficult time. And, I think these, to your point, and the second point, I was speaking for a group of students in France. One of my past employees is a professor there. She asked me to speak. And I can tell you, I do this every year, like clockwork, no pun intended, to teach the stuff about supply procurement. I can't every year. You know what people talk about? These are people graduating from this business school. They talk about, they want to know what companies are doing in environmental, social, and governance. They want to know what companies are doing in sustainability. They want to know about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And this always comes up every single time. And so when you're hiring, if you're a baby boomer, you might think, well, those things aren't quite as important. Or maybe if you're a millennial, you might say, well, I'm kind of interested, but not as much as I should be. You're going to find that if those people don't get the right answers to that, they're not going to want to come work for you. So now you got the no work from home, and you got the people that are upset because you're not, having a good DEI program. So, and we need to do it. I don't think we need to do it just to make things look good. We need it because of what I started with. We have a talent shortage. We have a perfect storm. We need these people to come in, and we want to take these people and we promote the right people from everywhere, meaning the fact that showing people that we can, yes, there wasn't very many women in supply chain. Now we got a lot of women. This is great. This is fantastic. We need more people. Last I checked, women is 50% of the workforce. So we need more people, right? So I think it's kind of a dual edge. First, hard to get the people, be careful they don't leave you. But more importantly, how do you attract people? So you got to address things like work from home. You have to address things like DEI. You got to address things like sustainability to engage them and be able them to come in and work for you. It's more than money, coming back to your point, Bob.
Yep. So let's get back to the internal professional development. So you can, when you say train them, people are looking for more than simply this. They're looking at on-demand training. They're looking at conferences, mentoring, research type projects. So is there a perfect mix of professional development internally, or what do you suggest that people do?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of things. I mean, first of all the training I've done, I had a handful of customers. They all went to Zoom. They all went online. So I don't think that's as good as in person. I'll never tell you that, but assuming that's what they did and that's how they wanted to run their business. And unfortunately, one of the things I saw was because Zoom is difficult to teach for 2 or 3 days, a significant topic. One of the problems you have is that you now reduce these things to a day, 2 half days, so you don't get as much material. So that's something we ought to recognize as a problem. And it isn't going away because a lot of people do that. So that's one thing to think about when you're trying to train people. And another tip I'd give to people, if somebody is going to go to a conference, and it's a great way to take one of your high potential people and send them to a conference and say, go learn what you can learn. But what I used to do, and I think it's still applicable today, yep, you can go do that, or you can take that training course or whatever you're going to do externally. But when you come back, I want you to write me an email and tell me the 3 things you're going to do differently in the future. And then I would take that email and I would put it in their performance development file. And when the performance development came up, let's say twice a year, I'd say, did you do the things you said? In other words, don't just go to conferences, go to conferences to learn something. And you can do that by the presentations that are there, or quite frankly, you can pull some CPO aside over in the corner and find out how they're doing something. There are a lot of ways you can do it. So I think holding people accountable, Colgate was very good at that. One of the things Colgate did well is that if you would put those plans in place and you'd say, these are the 3 things I want this person to do, learn next year, a training program, go to a conference, whatever. And they would hammer you if you didn't get it done. Right. I mean, all my people say, well, I didn't, well, you wrote it in the performance of player. Why weren't you to execute? And so they make a big deal out of it. I think that's a good thing for managers to do, is to, if you really think training's important, hold everybody accountable and make sure you as the manager do it, but more importantly, the individual does it. So I think that's something to think about when you go to conferences. And I think all those things are good that you mentioned. It's just a question is, do you go and roam around and learn nothing? Or do you go around, do you bring back 3 or 4 things to the company that makes a difference in the future? I think it's both. You got to really be good at learning things and bringing them back and improving your business.
Okay. So when you are ready to hire somebody, what are some specific tips you can offer about the process, about selecting, finding, recruiting, interviews, getting a good fit? How do you do that? How do you know that the person that you've hired is going to be somebody who's going to fit and have the skills and be able to work with your team, your existing team?
Well, first of all, as I said, is one thing we learned from my past is you got to have a good job description because you're going to probably check the box about how you're doing it. And I said many of our job descriptions either disappeared or had dust on them. You couldn't read them. So you got to have a good job description, and then you want to rate that person. However, you're going to interview. Usually, most companies today do team type of negotiation. But I think it's important when you're interviewing that person, you want to say these are the things we want you to give examples of. Be very critical, be very specific to say, what did you do to implement the P2P process or whatever you're going to do? And so you try to not just have, well, yeah, I've done that before. No, tell me more about it. What did you do as an individual? And I think it's critical that you certainly got to be able to test that person that he's done what he said he had done. I think it's important that you don't want to delegate it to HR. I've seen many managers in my career saying HR will handle it. You want it. This is important. Remember, I told you there's not enough people. Well, you want to make sure that you're involved in this thing, the hiring manager, maybe your boss, from the very beginning to make sure this thing goes smoothly. And so you want to have a good job description. You want to make sure you're interviewing them properly. You're checking the boxes. Cultural fit's always critical. We used to at Colgate have the HR person tested for most of their interviewing time about culture. Are they going to be a good fit for our culture? And so I think the last thing which is really important today is try to wrap this thing up quickly. Why? Because these people got choices now. So like we used to say 45 days it had to be done, but truthfully, it probably is like 20. I'm joking. I don't know what it is, but you got to do it quick. And you certainly, even if it takes a little bit of time to go through the interview process, you want to be hey, I like Joe or I like Mary. Keep in contact, pick up the phone, say, let's have it, we want to do that. Bring them back for a second interview, keep them engaged. Because I'm telling you, if you got a labor shortage, they may get a job offer tomorrow and you lose them. So you have to be very, very quick, at least be communicative with them where things are going all the time. I don't know if I answered your question with that one, but
No.
I think it's important.
No, I think that's very good advice. And as you say, the people who come in, they're asking questions about your company too. They will ask about sustainability. They'll ask about EDI. They will ask about these things. Where do you stand? So you should be really prepared to describe your company culture as well, I would think.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. So, what are the roles of universities? You work for one now.
Yeah.
And maybe this is your 1-minute commercial break to promote Rutgers. But what in general is the role of universities, do you think? How can they play a part to help companies and organizations really recruit and find and maintain their talent?
Yeah, so I'll be the first to tell you. So when I was at Colgate, didn't even really know much about internships in co-ops. We did hire, I think, one person in supply chain. I didn't really think much about it. When I went I worked full-time for 6 years for Rutgers Business School in the supply chain management department. One of my responsibilities was to help MBAs get jobs. So I really got to know how good companies handle these things. So a couple of pointers to think about. So the first thing I'd say was, you got all these ways you can hire people. I mean, you can hire people if they're a temp, you can bring them on full time. You could have somebody do a project for you, bring them on full time. You could go external and hire a lot of ways. But let's just stay with universities because that's the question. So I call it no risk hiring, Bob. Think about it. And I didn't know this. I'll be the first to tell you, I didn't do it. Colgate. No risk hiring. You're bringing an MBA student in for 12 to 14 weeks during the summer. By the end of the 12 to 14 weeks, you're going to know whether you like them or they don't like them. And you're going to know whether that person likes you. That's much different, quite frankly, than interviewing you. I'm sure you didn't do it. People on the call here didn't do it this way. But you typically, what you would do is have an individual come in. We'd interview, we'd do team negotiating, 20, 30 minutes each. And after everybody interviewed them, we'd huddle together, share notes, see if we wanted to bring them back for a final interview, maybe to myself, the CPO. Well, sometimes we make mistakes in those processes because we only see the person for a couple hours. And I know people on the call probably don't have this problem. If you want to then get rid of that person, HR says, excuse me, what's his developmental plan? Did you give him a performance appraisal? They're hard to get rid of, right? It isn't that easy in big companies. So my point would be no risk hiring, right? You got 12 to 14 weeks to evaluate this person. That person has time to evaluate you. And I think one of the biggest things you can do with university hiring is you're going to get access to that. And I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. And if you undergrad, you do co-ops, 3 to 6 months co-ops, and you can do them multiple times. So some of our undergrads sometimes work 2 co-ops and got credit for it, to be perfectly honest with you. So you're really going to know this person, right? And then you can hire them at the end. So I call it no risk hiring. I wish I would have done more of it when I was at Colgate. But the point would be is I would encourage you to think about. So one of the things that you can do with universities is get access to those. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. But one of the things we did at the Colgate is that, at Rutgers, is we had a supply chain council. It was made up of about 20 large corporations. They paid a fee to join it. We gave those people kind of, the first rights of trying to pick some of those MBA students. And so they're very active. And then that council would review our research, which is important, give feedback. That council would tell us what type of courses we should teach. So that's, you get very active with it, and you learn about it's like a partnership. You learn things from them, and they learn things from you, make it a better school, and they help you in industry, right? So let me give you one example about some hiring things to think about. I can't mention the company's name, but let's just say the first name is Jay and the second one is Jay, right? So just for example, well, how did they do it? Well, they were on campus early and often. They came and did lunch and learns. They hired people every year. So every student wanted to work for this company. And every time they showed up, there was a line coming out the door to talk to them, right? So then they get around December, one of the earliest people. If you can imagine, this MBA program is 2 years. What's interesting is that they in December would offer the summer internship way before anybody else. Most everybody else did it in the spring. What they do? They got the best and the brightest. Right? So then they would keep talking to the student. They would come do the summer internship. At the very end of the summer, it was like I said earlier, you evaluate the person for 12 to 14 weeks. At the end of the summer, that person would get a yay or nay, which I think is fair, whether they would hire them. So now you're talking about your end of your first year, right? You finished the summer internship. Now you know you have a job in the future with this company. And what do they say? Oh, by the way, we got a couple projects we'd like you to work on while you're there. I mean, it'd probably be, 5 to 10 hours a week. Would you mind doing that? And they link you with the school and the student to keep you active. And then, of course, when you graduate, they hire you. Now, that's pretty aggressive. There's very few companies that have the time or resources to do it. But you can at least do parts of those things where for example, the best advice I give people on the call, try to hire at least one student every year. Why? Because that shows you're active in the school. And more importantly, the students say, hey, Mary got that job last year. I'm going after that job this year. Don't let me kid you. These MBA students talk and they know where the right places are, where they want to work. So I think there's a real opportunity for hiring in universities. It's not the only one, but I would say there's a hiring opportunity, and there's an opportunity to link it with the school. And if you're near a school, go in and see them. Even if you're not, go visit them once a year. Go see the dean. Go see the head of supply chain. Go interview some students. Go lecture. You can lecture by Zoom now. right? Get yourself so people know who you are in your company. If you do that, you're going to find out you're going to be able to find some talent. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that's that's a good answer. It's got some very specific ideas that I think people can incorporate, and that's what we really need here. That's what these things are all about. So, uh, to kind of summarize, then, what are our key takeaways from this? What are some final thoughts here? Talent management is going to determine your success, right? It's all about talent, no matter what. Okay, so we should know what that talent is. So, what are some of our other key takeaways? Do you think here, Don?
Well, first, what I'm trying to make the point here is this talent thing is not going to go away. So don't think just because, oh, we'll get a recession and we'll get it back. Okay, we'll do that. But after recession, what are you going to do? You're still going to have 3.5% unemployment. So, I think into it. And so we're going to have robotics. Okay, I'll buy robotics for certain jobs. Yeah, I agree with that. Is that going to handle your strategic sourcing? Maybe bots, maybe the chat bots. I don't know. So I think the point would be, it is not going to go away. You better address it. And I think in the past we said we can manage this, we'll pay more money or whatever. So talent is the most important thing. I think the second thing, which we chatted about a little bit about, you really want to think about what skills you need in the future and then compare it to what skills you have currently. I suspect, just take the one example I used earlier, if I go to most procurement departments, and by the way, I do this in my consulting role with a particular group. When people say, well, we got to do digitalization, I said, great, you're right. What are you doing? It's like a deer in the headlights. Well, we're thinking about, now, are you doing anything in digitalization? Are you implementing any processes? Are you implementing any technology? And I get this deer in the headlights all the time, or they're partially implemented. So you got to think about, what do you really need and what's really important? And I think the skills that's a part of the answer. And certainly we talked about this issue about the generational. I'm not an expert, but I know a little bit about the generational differences. And I'll give one tip to the group to think about as we wind this down, is that 2007, 2008, when I was still there at Colgate, we were starting to lose some good people to the outside. They're getting swiped. And I went to my HR person and I said, geez, we just lost Joe and Mary. This is really frustrating. They're the two best people we had. And they said, what do I do? You know what she said to me? Get out of your office. Go to the individual's desk and talk to them. So I made all my staff get out of their office once a day and go sit at the people's desk and say, what's going on? How you doing? You got any problems I can help you with? And we didn't lose any people at that. Now, maybe they took all the good people, they weren't left anymore, but I'm joking. But I think you got to change this generational thing. Is very, very different. And I realize many people on the call probably aren't baby boomers like me, but you may be a Gen Xer, which has a different view. And probably many millennials are here, and millennials are very career focused, right? They want to have good careers. So you got to think about what's coming up here. What are we going to do with those Gen Zs that are coming up? It's going to be different. I think that's about it, Bob. But if anything else you can think of, I'd be happy to talk about.
Excellent. No, I think we're very good. You've given us a lot of food for thought. So excellent. So keep recruiting those folks from through Rutgers and see if you can make some more connections, get your students into some really good positions. But you're working generally with people who are already employed, and you're working in like executive education programs, aren't you? Is that right?
Right. So I do work on their executive education program. In the past, I'm a little lately. The last few years, I've slowed down, but I used to teach both in Newark and Singapore. So that's another whole level of different types of people. But mostly MBAs was where I worked most of the time.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again for your time here and your expertise. We appreciate it. This has been Global Sourcing Insights from CIPS. I'm Bob Rosbeck. Have a great day.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.